Hi guys, Pete the Wargamer here, back with another painting tutorial. In this video we'll be focusing on some Napoleonic era miniatures, particularly the French Chasseurs et Cheval, using the miniatures from Warlord Games as well as the Army Painter range of paints. Now before we go on, if you wanted to try out the techniques in this tutorial, Wargames Illustrated are giving away a free French cavalry sprue in its March edition. The sprue will either be a Chasseurs et Cheval, Hussar or Lancer sprue, all of which can be painted in the colours and techniques that I'll be using in this video. Before we start painting, we first of all need to apply a primer so that the later layers of paint adhere to the miniature's surface. It doesn't matter too much which colour you go for, but I have opted to use a grey airbrush primer to help paint the various mid-tones of the miniature. We will begin painting our miniature by applying all of the base coats first. For all of the base coats that I'll be painting in this video, you'll want to thin it down with a little water. The paint I'm using for this first step is Angel Green, so mix it with your water in roughly equal quantities, which will make the paint easy to work with. With our paint thinned out, we now want to paint the entirety of the jacket and breeches. Don't worry about getting perfect coverage with your first layer, as this is why we watered down our paint. After applying your first layer, allow the paint to dry before applying a second over the top. This layering technique will give you a much smoother finish whilst avoiding the possibility of obscuring details by applying the paint too thickly. Next, we want to paint the red details of the miniature, and for this I'll be using Vampire Red. When it comes to these details, there are a whole range of colours to choose from, including pinks, pale blues, yellows and oranges, depending on which regiment you're going for. However, I'll be styling my particular Chasseurs et Cheval after the first regiment, which means that the cuffs, piping and collar will all be red. Additionally, as I'll be painting one of the elite members of the regiment, I'll be painting the pom-pom on his shako with red as well. To paint the horse as well as the wooden furniture of the rifle, we'll be starting off with an all-over application of dirt spatter to give us that dark brown coloration. For the sheep's wool of the saddle cover, we want to begin with a slightly off-white colour to represent the wool. Therefore, I've chosen Banshee Brown for this. You can also use this paint to start off painting any markings on the horse's hooves or face. To paint the white sash, gloves and straps around the waist, we want to start off with a very pale grey Spaceship Exterior. Now grey might seem like an odd choice for painting white, but it will allow us to apply an edge highlight of pure white later on. To paint the face of our Chasseur, we will want to use a base coat of Kobold Skin. To paint the black areas of the model, which include the boots, reins and shako, we'll be using the very dark grey Necromancer Cloak instead of a black. This is to allow the later dark tone wash to create some definition between the recessed and raised areas. With the non-metallics completed, we can start work on the metal areas. The first of these are any steel or silver parts of the model, and for this we'll be using gun metal. For the remaining gold areas of the model, which include the sword guard and buckles, you want to base coat using Greedy Gold. Once you've completed this step, make sure that you thoroughly clean out your brushes and paint mortar, as you do not want to cross-contaminate the metal flakes found in these last two paints into your other non-metallic paints. With our base coats completed, we now want to apply a wash of Miltary Shader, but before we do, we need to again thin it down. This is because applying it straight from the bottle would be much too strong. However, instead of using water, this time I'll be mixing in some Army Painter Quick Shade Mixing Medium in equal parts wash to medium. The medium works by reducing the amount of pigment in the ink without changing its consistency. I find that this results in a much smoother and more subtle result than mixing in water. However, if you don't have access to this medium, you could instead use a distilled water instead. Armed with your thinned Miltary Shader, you now want to apply this wash to the green coloured areas such as the tunic and the trousers. Following the same principles as before, apply a wash of strong tone over the Vampire Red, Greedy Gold and Dirt Spatter painted areas. For the areas that we painted using Banshee Brown, apply a thinned down mixture of soft tone. As I mentioned earlier, apply a layer of dark tone over the areas that we painted with Necromancer Cloak. You can also apply a heavily thinned mixture of dark tone to the white parts of the model that we painted with Spaceship Exterior. The final wash will be applied to the skin, and for this we'll be using Flesh Wash. Once the washes have dried, we now want to add some highlights to help improve the level of detail. To do this, lightly drag the tip of a thin brush along the raised edges. This will create a small line of lighter paint along those edges, helping to both improve the level of depth and definition. We will start off by highlighting the green areas using Greenskin. By thinning down the paint with just a little water, we should make this task much easier, as the flow of paint should be much smoother than if you'd used it straight from the bottle. To pick out the edges of the red parts of the miniature, use a thin line of pure red. For the horse's brown colouring that we tackled with dirt spatter, I'll be applying an edge highlight of leather brown. To paint the wooden furniture of the rifle slung at the Chasseurs' side, I'll be using some fur brown to pick out the edges. Next, you'll want to highlight the sheepskin and any other areas that you painted with Banshee Brown using some drake tooth. To highlight the black areas, we'll be using ash grey. This light grey will contrast nicely against the dark shadows we achieved with our wash of dark tone. However, make sure that you only apply thin lines to the top sections of these areas. For the edges of the white parts of the miniature, apply some thin edge lining of matte white. To pick out the more prominent facial features such as the nose, cheeks and brow, use some corpse pale. To highlight both the gold and silver metallic parts of our miniature, we'll be using shining silver. This thin and bright silver line that the paint creates will give the effect of the metal reflecting light off its most prominent parts. And here we have the completed Chasseurs Cheval. As I mentioned before, you will find a Warlord Games Chasseurs Cheval, Hussar or Lancer sprue in the March edition of War Games Illustrated, so keep an eye out for that magazine in your newsagents if you'd like to try out these techniques. You can find a full list of all the paints that I've used in this tutorial in the description below, along with any other equipment that I've used to create this video. If you enjoyed this video, do let me know in the comments below, and if you haven't done so already, be sure to check out my Patreon page if you'd like to support me in making these videos. If you have any questions or just like to chat with others who enjoy my channel, I've set up a Discord server which you can find a link to in the description below. So the only thing left to say is, thanks for watching and goodbye.